So as I mentioned before, I am an insider, I am a whistleblower, I am revealing some inside information here. So the main things which I'm telling you is that, first of all, China knows the moon landings were a hoax. And the second thing is they have evidence that it was a hoax. They have photographs of the Apollo landing sites. And the third thing is they actually have a deal with NASA. The deal is if you guys don't blow the whistle on us, we will continue sharing technology with you. And that has been the deal ever since the 1984. So this is China's, it's difficult for many people to understand China's, a lot of people ask me, why isn't China blowing the whistle? And the China's is trying to maintain friendship, you know? So this is the Chinese mentality. There's a saying in ancient Chinese philosophy. It says, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. So we're not trying to make enemies here with America. You know, we're trying to keep a friendship. And so we agreed not, the Chinese government agreed not to blow the whistle on the Apollo missions. And now the second thing is, how did I come to know this information? How did I come to know this information? So I was a university student in America. I was in 1999, I graduated from Portland State University, and I was majoring in astrophysics and quantum mechanics. And during that time, I was approached by several scouts. You know, different universities send scouts into my university, and many of these scouts were trying to recruit me to other universities. And one of them actually offered me a job at NASA. But I turned them down, you know, because I said, no, I'm not interested. I'm leaving the country. And I went after that in 1999, I moved to India and I started studying medicine in India. So many people ask me, why do you have an Indian sounding name? It's because I'm actually a medical doctor who studied in India. Now, because I have a lot of people asking me questions in the group about, you know, why isn't China blowing the whistle on this moon landings? And as I mentioned, China is receiving technological support from NASA. Okay. Now, as most people are aware, China was banned from the ISS, right? But this was just some members of Congress who wanted China to be banned. And NASA didn't agree with this, but they were forced to follow it. So what they did was they just leaking the technology through the European Space Agency. Okay. Now, the Chinese space station is basically just a copy of the ISS, you know. If they wanted to, these two space stations could link up, you know, because it's the same technology. So now the thing is, China has an agreement with NASA. We will wait for you to admit the Apollo missions were a hoax. We're going to wait. You said you'd do it in 2025, 2026, maybe. We're hoping for that deadline for Artemis 3, that it actually works out and they can fulfill their promise and admit the Apollo missions were a hoax. Now, the way China did this agreement, they said, okay, we will not expose the fact it was a hoax, but we are also not going to lie for you. Okay? So now, many other countries have this same agreement with NASA. For example, India. Okay? India has this same agreement, but India agreed to lie for them. Okay? So what happened was India sent this space probe around the moon, Chandrayaan, which photographed the Apollo landing sites. And then they did a Zoom conference where they released an image of the Apollo 11 landing site, and it showed that it was an unmanned craft. Okay, there was no footprints there, and it was a three-legged craft, not a four-legged craft, at the Apollo landing site. So they released this photo on a Zoom conference, and this photo shows that the Apollo missions were a hoax. But then what happened was NASA said, wait a minute, you weren't supposed to expose that thing. So India said, sorry. And then they said, how can we make it up to you? And then NASA gave them an LRO image of the Apollo 12 landing site. And they said, just release this one, because this one has the footprints around the ship. So India said, okay. So India released this Apollo 12 landing site image, which they didn't even take themselves. It's just a photoshopped garbage, you know. And I'm 100% sure that Elon Musk agreed to lie for NASA, right? You don't win a NASA contract without agreeing to lie for them, you know.
Yeah.
It's like there was one interview where Musk, and they were asking him, Musk, what do you think about the problems of space radiation? And Musk was, oh, it's not such a big problem. This is you know, because he agreed to lie for them. Of course, it's the number one problem. He knows all about it, but he can't say that.
Exactly.
You know, he agreed to lie for them. But China doesn't have that. You know, China is like, we are not going to lie for you. Okay. So the reason why this is important is because if you go to the Wikipedia webpage, called Third-Party Evidence for the Apollo Moon Landings, and you look up China, okay, it says China found evidence that the Apollo missions were real. This is totally false, okay? You go to the Wikipedia and you look for the reference, okay? Where is your reference? Where do you say that? Okay, and down at the bottom of the page, you can click on the reference. It's a dead link. There's no reference, okay? They're just making a false statement, you know? Now, you can on Internet Archives, you can find what China said, okay? What was the official statement China said? You can find it on Internet Archives. China said, we have found evidence of the Apollo missions, which means something landed there, okay?
Good choice of words, yeah.
Yes, so China's tactics are don't make enemies with these people, okay? So we're not going to publicly say that it was a hoax, and we're not going to publicly say it was real either, okay? We just said we found evidence. That's the official Chinese government's statement, okay? Now, when in 2016, I asked them, I said, you know, I was offered a job with the Chinese Space Agency, and I said, you have photographs of the Apollo landing sites, right?
Yeah.
And of course they did, you know, because that was in 2012, you know, the Chang'e 2 made the first ever complete lunar map, you know. The complete lunar map was completed in 2012. And that was a low resolution map, you know. And so they said, yes, you know, we've seen the Apollo landing sites. We can actually prove that it was a hoax, you know. But we're not releasing those images, you know. Chinese not releasing the images of the Apollo landing site. And since 2012, you know, there's been other Chang'e missions which have much higher resolution cameras, right? So, you know,
definitely.
Even you know, like I had seen the Chinese images in 2016, you know, but you couldn't really make out what was there at the Apollo landing sites because it wasn't so high res. But since then, we have some higher res images of the Apollo landing sites, which show beyond a shadow of a doubt that these were just simply unmanned crafts. Okay.
Yeah.
But let's. The thing is, one thing that I did research is on several of the Apollo videos, when the ship is taking off, there's the inside camera looking down, okay? And in some of the liftoff scenes, you can see the ground and where the footprints are, okay? Now, for me, the first thing I did was I was going to check with the Apollo videos. Are the footprints the same from the videos as they are on these LRO images? And they are. They do check out, right? So how did they, this brings up the question, my favorite question is, how did they pull this thing off, okay? So the way they pulled it off is they sent unmanned crafts, and those crafts would take photos of the areas of the landing site. And they use that data to create the studio sets, okay? They created all the mountain backdrops, okay? And they had planned out, okay, the astronauts are going to walk over here and walk over there, and they're going to leave footprints and rover tracks, right? That was all scripted out, where they were going to go, where they're going to walk, where they're going to drive. And then when they filmed the liftoff scene, they had all the footprints right. So naturally, when they made the LRO images, then they just used Photoshop to paint the same footprints and rover tracks, right? But it brings up the question, would those footprints and rover tracks still be visible today, you know, after, you know, the moon is bombarded with thousands of tons of micrometeorites every year, you know? And not only that, there are winds on the moon. It's an electromagnetic whirlwinds, you know. So what we know about the moon today compared to what they knew back then. So the whole theory, you know, that 40 years later they could photograph the footprints, it's kind of a nonsense theory. But most people aren't scientists, so they don't think that way. You know, they see the footprints. Oh yes. There's the proof it was real.
Yeah, and that also brings up the issue of the degradation and what the degradation of the equipment itself would be from that constant bombardment from the other elements that you would find in that region of space. So, I mean, there's a lot that a lot of people don't take into consideration. They see the footprints and they say yes. Now, Raza, before we wrap up, I just want to get back to a little bit about your background here, and I just noticed that you're currently writing papers right now for the Chinese Space Agency. Specifically, I'm reading here in terms of radiation in deep space. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that and exactly what you're doing right now? And that gives people a better, appreciation of your background and knowledge when it comes to this video series that you and I are doing.
Right. So when I was first offered the job to work with the Chinese Space Agency in 2016. But at that time, I turned them down because at that time, I wasn't interested in space, really. You know, I was working in other departments. I was working in the free energy department. And so, but later I had a change of heart. What it means is that I decided to take them up on the offer. This was just last year, in 2022. In 2022, I decided to take them up on the offer. And I said, okay, I'll work for you. What do you want me to do? And they said, try to find out what NASA is doing to try to protect the astronauts from the radiation of deep space. And so that's my job. I basically just studying the materials that the ships are made out of was the boron nitride nanotubes. This is the shielding which the Artemis ship is made out of it, and the Artemis suits are made out of boron nitride nanotubes, because that is the best material human beings have come up with for blocking out radiation. Plus, also, they're going to put bags of water on the inside walls of the ship. Okay? So the water and the boron nitride nanotubes, these are the primary means which Artemis is using now to protect the astronauts. So now, that's my job. I'm just writing articles. I'm trying to find out, because that technology has not been released to China yet. You know, how to manufacture boron nitride nanotubes has not been released to China. But as I mentioned, China has an agreement with NASA. If China doesn't blow the whistle, then NASA will share that technology with us. So now that's my job, you know. But it's just a part-time job, you know. I have 3 jobs, you know. One, I'm writing papers on quantum energy, and the second part-time job, I'm writing papers on radiation shielding. But my full-time job, I'm just an English teacher. I teach English at the university near the launch pad.